Do you feel more pressure to tip these days, tipping more money more often, and sometimes at places you didn't expect? You're not alone. Earlier this year, an Angus Reid survey found that the majority of Canadians are feeling the pinch of tipflation, but one expert says we could be reaching a tipping point.
In the last few years, we've seen a big shift in where and how we tip in Canada. And I think that's given rise to a lot of reflection among people about what role, if any, tipping should play when we compensate workers in our country.
Good girl!
It's become the butt of many a TikTok joke. And on the streets of Toronto, do you feel more pressure to tip these days than you did before?
100%.
Yeah.
I think it's becoming more it's happening rather than is it actually, is the service actually great?
Have you ever gotten those screens that are that give you the
and they turn them towards you?
Yeah.
Yeah, that frustrates me a lot.
And I stand behind the cash and I tap two buttons and turn the screen. It's like, I'm not tipping you for turning the screen.
So what's driving this so-called tipflation?
In light of the pandemic, people were looking for a way to in a way, give something extra to those who were doing essential work. And tipping was one way of doing that. And then more recently, businesses have been in a labor crunch and have been looking for ways to give a little bit of extra value to their workers. And tipping was a relatively attractive way for them to give more compensation to their workers by passing on the responsibility for that to consumers.
University of Victoria professor Simon Peck adds that payment systems like Square have made it easy even for smaller businesses to make tipping a simple turn of a screen. But if you're worried about whether it's rude to decline, even etiquette expert Julie Blais-Como doesn't quite view the prompts as polite.
I almost perceive it as intimidation. And probably a lot of our viewers have experienced where they're being rated on how much they're giving.
So is change on the way? That Angus Reid poll from February found that close to 60% of Canadians would prefer scrapping gratuities altogether for a service-included model and higher base wages for employees. Vanpot House is one of a number of no-tip restaurants that have emerged in Toronto recently.
But we make sure that it's known that there's no obligation. We do earn a livable wage. The starting pay here is $25 an hour with benefits.
The casual tea and board game house hasn't had to increase its food and drink prices to compensate, but some no-tip restaurants have.
Right now, most of Canadians want to see a shift. And I think if these businesses that are trying to go against the grain can really communicate why what they're doing is important to them, I think they'll succeed in getting more customers through their doors.
Peck argues that governments can also play a role in bringing down tipflation by exploring different compensation models for service industries or even enacting rules around how tips are solicited and the ranges that are permitted. So what is the standard tip now? Well, really it depends on who you ask. According to Blais-Como, despite what the prompt screen might tell you, in restaurants, she says generally 15% before tax, 10% at places like salons, but you can decide for yourself. In Toronto, Natividad, City News.